Hello and welcome. You're watching FII. I'm Sonal Mehrotra Kapoor. Now, if you are somebody who's staying on rent or somebody who's a landlord giving your place out for rent, then today's program is for you because your life is about to change, all thanks to the new Model Tenancy Act, which is now in place. But what exactly does it mean? What is there in this new Model Act for landlords, for tenants? We'll be taking you through all of that. So without any further ado, let's get into our explainer. First, what is this act all about? Well, the act really proposes a complete overhauling of the legal framework of rental housing across the country. Many have even called it a game changer. It was, of course, approved by the government on the 2nd of June 2021, and the new law is a model law, which basically means it has been prepared with the objective of balancing, well, that's what the definition is in the law that has been floated, that it is to balance out the interests and rights of both landlords and tenants and to create an accountable and transparent ecosystem for renting the premises in a disciplined and more efficient manner. Now, who doesn't want that, right? But why is it called a Model Act, and what does it really mean? Well, this means that it provides a prototype of a law that states and union territories can adopt completely with changes or even not adopt at all. How come? Well, the reason behind that is that issuing such a Model Act and not passing a binding law is that the Parliament cannot pass a binding law. In this case, land, remember, falls as a state list and of the 7th schedule according to the Article 347 of the Constitution. That means state governments have exclusive powers to make laws on subjects in the state list. So what exactly was the need? What is the reason for the genesis of this act? Let's look into that first. Well, it aims to formalize the shadow market of rental housing, unlock vacant properties, so many of them at the moment in the country, increase rental yields, ease and remove the exploitative practices, and also reduce procedural barriers in registration as well. And again, it is aimed at increasing transparency and discipline. How exactly does it plan to do this? What will change? Well, any new rental deals now must be a written agreement. States, if they choose to implement it as is, would need to set up a tracked grievances redressal mechanism consisting of the rent authority or the rent court and the rental tribunal, that is. Disposal of these grievances must be done in a time-bound manner, and that time is 60 days only. Let's look at the price ceiling over here. Well, that will be removed completely. That's a big game changer. Digital platform, that is another game changer for uploading and keeping a tab on rental agreements in several languages as well, not just in English. Subletting, another game changer, will be the discretion of the landlord. Structural changes to the premises will need prior written consent from the landlord. And security deposit, well, in residential places, a maximum of 2 months rent, and in non-residential, minimum of 1 month's rent, maximum of 6 months. That leeway has been given. When it comes to repairs and maintenance, this is the area which at the moment falls really in the grey zone. Nobody really knows how it works and a lot of push and pull happens. Well, the Act lists that who is responsible for what kind of changes. In case of non-compliance, the amount will be deducted from the security deposit of the tenant and rent for the landlord as well. On the whole, the repair of the overall structure, that means plumbing system and wiring, is the responsibility of the landlord. Repair in individual spots like taps, switches are the responsibility of the tenants. Evictions, another key reason of worry for a lot of landlords. Well, the Act defines that as well, and this will be done only in case of misuse of premises as decided by the rent court. The case of tenant does not vacate, the landlord can levy twice the rent for the next month and 4 times the rent thereon. And they also define what exactly is misuse. It means public nuisance, it means damage, use of immoral or illegal purposes as well. And then what about force majeure? Meaning an unforeseeable circumstances in which somebody cannot fulfill the contract. Well, that it says in such cases the tenant will be allowed to stay for a month since the end of the event. So those are some of the key features over there, but let's also give you some key takeaways for what's in it for landlords and tenants. The key objective, remember, again, is to build trust between the landlords and tenants because it clearly defines their obligations. For tenants, for example, the security deposit will be paid and should not exceed 2 months rent. In residential properties, like I said, 6 months rent in case of non-residential properties as well. Landlord cannot cut power, water when there is a dispute, something that we see happen a lot in India. When it comes to the part of the landlords, however, they cannot sublet to someone else without permission, and they can charge double rent for 2 months post expiry as well. They can enter property on rent after 24 hours of notice, however. So those were the key takeaways on how this game changer, really new act has been floated. What will happen, which states will adopt, in what form, that remains to be seen. On that note, let's introduce our panel now. We have with us Dr. Niranjan Hiranandani, back with us on FII. Thank you so much for your time. We've got Sameer Chaudhary join us, barrister and advocate, with wearing his legal hat over here on how these disputes are really going to work. We've got Mani Ragaranjan join us. He's the Group Chief Operating Officer, Housing.com, PropTiger.com and Marken.com as well. And of course, Sameer is also back with us. He's the founder and CEO of Prop Equity. Let me go to Dr. Hiranandani first. I've just pointed out some of the key takeaways from it. I'm sure there are some loopholes as well. It looks really fascinating at this point. The entire act has so much to really look forward to. What is your analysis, and where do you think some work is still required when it comes to this act?
Okay, the big work which is required is to persuade the states which are not BJP states to accept it.
Right.
So the question will be a divide of India between the states which are BJP states and non-BJP states to convince the non-BJP states that, look, it's a good law, and irrespective of the fact that it has been proposed by the BJP Prime Minister and the BJP government at the center, it's a good law and it will make a difference.
You're of course hinting at Maharashtra being one of the states where Shiv Sena is already opposed to it a little.
Yes, I understand. But there are reasons for opposition because there is a constituency of old rent people. And those who have not studied the law in great detail will realize that there are provisions by which you can incorporate all this, because this law is sought to be prospective, not retrospective. So some of the people in Mumbai have objected, and in fact I discussed with them, and they said, oh, you know, all these poor people who are living in old houses are going to be thrown out by the landlords, which is absolutely not true. So I think there's a lot of disinformation, and I think it's good for you to have a program like this which will clear that air at least, so that let politics be politics, but the reality of the economics on the ground should be done. The major thing which I want to point out is something different. The Prime Minister, when he said housing for all 5 years ago, the main crux of that whole thing was to create 1.1 crore houses on ownership basis which were affordable. Today, if you get the Model Tenancy Act, you are going to double that number and which will be available on rent and which will be available immediately, instantly and today. However, let's presume that even 30% or 40% of that comes into the market. We'll still have 40 lakh houses coming into the marketplace, which is a huge number of people who are hesitant to give it. There are NRIs who I know have kept their flats vacant for 10 years, 15 years, because they are petrified that when they come back, they will not get their houses. So I think all these factors become extremely important to understand the information. And last but not the least, the states can amend the act to suit their state's requirements.
Absolutely.
So I think there's no question of opposing the act. The question is, how do you adapt the act to the requirements of each city and state? And this should be doable, but you will double the number of people. And remember, in Mumbai, 50% of our population live in jhoppadpattis. At least 10% of them, if they get houses on rent in proper Pakka RCC building, you won't have the kind of collapses that you saw yesterday happen in Malavani of unauthorized buildings and jhoppadpattis going into 3 tiers levels. This would not happen if you create rental housing for the north.
Lots of points, really important points over there on what Niranjan has just said. But let me also bring in a legal aspect over here. Sameer Chaudhary, your thoughts on which way is this likely going to go? And, you know, rightly said, this is not set in stone. It's a model act, like we explained. So every state is open to adapting their own version, if one can call it that, of this act. But I don't think there's any dispute in how progressive really this act is, especially in putting it out, everything, all the details on a portal which is easily accessible for people. The flip side to that might be that, again, the digital divide, how does one have access to that? If you could unmute yourself, please.
Undoubtedly, Sonal, this is a progressive legislation which contemplates to bridge the gap between the rent regulation acts which are present as of now, because the capping in the rent regulation acts as of now is very insignificant. For a place like Delhi, any matter to come within the rent regulation act is the monthly rent has to be less than 3,500 rupees. And we're aware that, I mean, what kind of property we can get in Delhi at that lower price. So undoubtedly, it's a progressive law. The problem that we foresee is how the states will enact it, how much of it will be adopted or amended. Now coming to the legal aspect of it with respect to the creation of the rent authority, the rent court and the rent tribunal. What is excellent in this law is the fact that the requirements of CPC have been done away with. The act says that the rent court and the rent authority, including the tribunal, will decide the matters before it with respect to the disputes arising in respect of this law, without disregarding the procedure prescribed under the Civil Procedure Code. As a result, what used to happen earlier, the eviction proceedings, particularly at the stage of evidence, used to go on forever, which was a major restriction or a lacuna in the law, which was exploited and made it lopsided in favor of the tenants. So it is a right step in the direction to bridge the gap and to expedite the entire process so as to restore the faith of the landlords in the judicial system that the houses will be evicted for. Another important change that I see in this legislation is earlier, if you were claiming in a court of law for arrears of rent, supposing a dispute has been going on, you easily, without going into evidence, you could get only the last paid rent, that too without interest. But because this law provides that in case the lease is terminated, the eviction has to happen, it provides for twice the rent for 2 months and thereafter 4 months. 4 months, the rent will be 4 times the last paid rent. So that is also a good step which will undoubtedly favor the landlords. The only flip side to this that I see as of now is it may not yield a higher rental return because of the sheer demand and supply gap, which will be even bridged further because of the new houses that will come into the market.
Right, and so the timely judgment really putting a lot of things in place and a lot to take away for the landlords. And isn't that really the objective here, if money can come in on that one, to really put away the hesitancy that a lot of people have in getting and floating their flats on their houses on rent over here. We see that, like Niranjan also said, all over the country, not just Delhi and Mumbai.
Yeah, I think if you look at the census in 2011, right, there were over about a crore of homes in the country which were not rented out and which were like totally vacant. And one can only speculate what the number is right now. So I think this is not the first
attempt. By now you mean the COVID reality and how people are actually going back home, and a lot of spaces in metros at least are open because of work from home.
Right, and this is not the first time that the government has tried to come up with something around the lines of regulating the rental market. And I'm really glad that the government has passed a Model Tenancy Act, and it's been approved by the cabinet. But I do have a couple of concerns on this. So one is, as Dr. Hiranandani said, this is not binding on the states, right? Because land is a state subject. So I just hope that this act will be implemented in the full spirit and at the form. In the case of RERA, for example, right, there were some states that implemented it to the letter and spirit of the law, and there were some states that did not. So in some states, for example, RERA has now become a process and not an event. Right? So that's one thing which is concerning to me. The second thing which is concerning to me is that, how will the rental authority handle the sheer volume of cases that are likely to come up, right? You're talking about a huge market. You're talking about 25 to 30 crore homes that are potentially in rent in the urban areas, and about 70% of India's rental market is in the urban areas. So I do hope that the Act also considers the fact that the volume of cases is likely to be huge. You need to have a very strong rental authority which is capable of disposing cases within like 60 days.
Okay.
Otherwise, this would again be another act, and the confidence of landlords will not likely change.
All right, important points over there. I also quickly want to see if we have Samir with us just now and get in a word from him. And while we do that, let me go back to Dr. Hiranandani over there. You know, in the post-COVID world, and we did an earlier show on how the entire landscape of rentals in the country have changed. Can I get a quick update from you on how it's looking like at the moment and what the trends are likely to be, keeping this in mind, perhaps building in more confidence in the landlords to start letting now?
Sonal, absolutely correct. There has been a shake-up in, like many industries, real estate also has seen this shake-up. And more so in the rental market, for the simple reason that people have been dishoused for no reason. People wanted their parents to come home. They wanted their brothers and sisters who were affected by COVID to come home. And in the rental situation, there was a huge problem in terms of societies and other people accepting it. So there have been challenges as far as the rental market is concerned. But the reason is also non-availability. Whenever you create a shortage of items which are created, you find a great difficulty in getting what you need or want. The moment you create surpluses of rental housing, surpluses of housing, that problem gets resolved. You know, there is no shortage and there's no cringing about it. And what Mr. Mani correctly put across, the problem of the legal remedies that become very complicated. But the moment you create surpluses, if you have 1 crore of houses coming in and investments taking place into the sector, developers, institutions, foreign direct investment coming into this sector, all that will create surpluses in the sector over a period of time, of course. But with maybe this 1 crore or 30% of this 1 crore coming into the market, you will find some remedy into it. So my view is personally, laws like this is certainly going to bring a paradigm shift in the rental market of the state, and investment into this marketplace is definitely going to have, though there are questions of the amount of returns that we are getting in terms of investment into residential as compared to commercial, but that's another story. My belief is that the rental market will create lots of investment into it by individuals. Somebody has one flat. They want another flat for their child for the future. They invested into today. But they don't want to give it to the child today because the child is still growing up, studying or whatever it is. But you create that housing and all. In the interim period, you give it on rent. That's individual. You can have people, corporates who have got surplus monies to invest into it. Developers who have a mixed-use thing. And of course, things like REITs. In America, REITs in residential housing is a big story, bigger than commercial. So all this will mature over a period of years. Once this legislation comes into place, of course, whatever Samir and Mani have said, there will be riders on the legal side of it and the actual operations of it. And I fully concur with their views. But the point is, the direction is correct, and we should move into that line.
In fact, if you see this act, you know, along with RERA, you actually see a paradigm shift in the entire real estate sector in the country and moving towards the right direction. So we really need to welcome this at this point. But on the issue of this COVID reality, you know, one of the major concerns has been a lot of people have gone back, and there are at the moment as we speak a lot of disputes pertaining to landlords and tenants into what happens to the rent during the time of the lockdown. Some people have amicably come to a solution, others are still struggling. I personally know of so many people who are saying that we don't know how to carry or sort of sort out the differences over here. Lots of people sort of moving out as well. I want to quickly get in a word from Samir Chaudhary at this point to see, you know, with so many cases coming up right now, what exactly is the way forward? Is this something that can be resolved in the present scenario?
So, no, unfortunately, the law is clear on that aspect. This being an unprecedented event, as far as the legal position is concerned, it's favored is loaded in favor of the landlord, because this event, the lockdown, would not constitute a force majeure as such unless it is exclusively incorporated in the lease deed as on date and contemplates a provision like a pandemic, which is very rare. I regularly advise tenants on this, and Delhi High Court even has clarified that because there is no obstruction with respect to you staying in the property, so it will not be covered under the Property Act as well. So, I mean, it's an unfortunate situation, but it is a situation that legally a tenant stands to lose unless there are specific provisions with respect to force majeure in the lease agreement, and it contemplates a situation like a pandemic. The rent would have to be paid.
So in the future, please do add in this pandemic sort of clause to it as well. That's the learning out of this, and have that sorted out with your landlord first up, because there is no precedent.
Yeah, I can tell you by experience since last year, everybody has started looking at force majeure clauses more carefully. Earlier, it was one of the midnight clauses that one used to just put it in the end, but now everyone's taking notice of it.
Just the world we've all come to live in now. Let me also bring in Samir D'Souza, joining us a little late on the program. Welcome. We are all discussing what exactly are the pros and cons of this new act. A lot of people saying that this is really something that India needs right now. What are your concerns? What are you hearing from people?
I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. However, I would like to make a few suggestions to this Model Tenancy Act. One is that, the clause of eviction should also be applicable at time of non-payment of rent. So if a tenant stops to pay rent, he continues to enjoy the premises, but he does not have to pay the rent, and the eviction clause is not applicable for non-payment of rent. The second thing is that market forces...
But it says misbehavior or something like that. It's been...
But that does not lead to non-payment of rent.
It does not specifically say non-payment of rent.
Yes, and if the tenant is enjoying the premises, he should be paying rent. Whether he should not stop paying rent at all under any circumstances. The second point that I'd like to make is that 2-month security clause for maximum residential homes is too low. Sometimes you rent out furnished premises where the furniture is very expensive. Also, and the law should not decide what maximum rental you should be able to take. In fact, in a city like Mumbai, people take much higher security deposits and a much lower rental. So the market forces should determine the rentals and security deposits and the other angles to it. That is the two points that I'd like to make, and I still think that 60 days for any result to come out is too short a time frame. I hope the government can manage to set up these rental bodies which can take, it's not practical. I don't think it's, the cases take 10 years. For them to get resolved in 2 months is not possible according to me. So I think they should be much more stricter on that, and that's why the rental should continue, and the tenant should not have the option not to pay rent. If he's not paying rent, he should be evicted immediately.
All right. So good to get that perspective as well. I'm afraid that's all the time we have on the program today, but good to hear all your views. Thanks so much for your time. Well, that is the new Model Tenancy Act. I wish and hope that you've got some quick takeaways from that. That's it from us. Bye-bye for now.